This audiobook is not for sale.
After Atlantis.
Part 2, Politics of Blood.
Several days pass during which the philosopher grows accustomed to his barbaric guest. The howling is still heard several times in the evening. The blanket he has left on the porch remains untouched. You promised stories and historical accounts in exchange for your stay here, I said. It has been several days now, and I have only heard anecdotes and trivial adventures, or else howlings at night. I now require that you treat on all which you know, for it is evident that you have knowledge of things beyond the common keen.
I gather that you are a private man,
He said.
and not devoid of wisdom. Soon the time of the half-moon will make things safe. I will tell you all that you can bear, especially on certain historical events, those which interest the righteous. However, pray, leave me to work the garden for another day, since I cannot disclose all at once, and must foremeasure my words.
Over the next several days, he imparted to me with great care a synopsis of the Black Book, the 33rd tome, which he memorized for 4 years while awaiting execution in the prisons of Gohha on the coast of the Kalar. He had long since resigned to joke with himself about what he called the Black Books of Melancholy, because of the bitter-sweet consolations which memorizing the tome bears upon me throughout the years, he said. The very work of those literatures are worthy of epic verse, rhyme stocks, whether they are separated into tomes or all copied into one huge black tomus of elephant skin. It is recorded that the text appears for a brief time, a few years, and is glimpsed by the learned, added to, and then lost again for centuries. These writings I, therefore, endeavor to set down, assiduously applying to every word. But as you will learn, it all came to naught. I decided to provoke him out of silence, mindful of that going dagger at his side, however. After completing several rolls, I suggested that all the ancient work we had been so laboring to record was, after all, downright useless. His fingers moved over the blade of Caculus. A curious history, these your Ammouric texts, if they should be called even that. Good for the idle and disturbed, the melancholic. Be assured, the rodents and worms will someday digest them well. You look surprised. I suppose that you think of them as having floated down from that heaven of yours. Whatever.
I take exception to such an arrogant comment, friend,
He retorted.
and I expect more from the wise, especially an Eldark.
We Eldark are beyond worldly caring. We understand how all things do pass. The Neoplatonic sages have illuminated our scriptures with their reason and insight. Yes, all are past, never again to occur. These very things, which in the black books have been kept by memory, have served only to make my fingers numb and my wrist ache. There is no beneficial learning they pass down, not as you might find in a medical or engineering text. Even an erroneous philosophical work would serve a greater purpose. These writings, now recorded here, are merely the ravings of zealots, outcast poets, and feeble old prophetesses.
You have not the key to their meaning, and you make yourself sound ridiculous in the sight of angels, so that you will learn aright how useful and important such writings are. I will demonstrate how they impact upon the living. I will, in 2 days, expound upon the most complex and dangerous of all disclosures, namely, the history of the imperial conspiracies.
At this I was silent, and could not well respond, for inwardly I rejoiced with great glee. I knew that he had been seeking to avoid relating dangerous research, and had wasted much time by merely delving into obscure antiquities instead, reciting poems and enigmas, or omitting more serious and revelatory lore. Now, however, he had taken my bait. Each morning I would awaken Heptho before dawn, under gentle compulsion, that he join in meditations, and that he beg the aid of the angelic wheel of timeless memory, one of their vain superstitions which I suspect may hide some half-truth. I kept requesting that not even a tiny grain of knowledge be omitted from his treatment. So, although we shall never recover the originals, my account shall at least give the closest retelling. It took several hours for his memory to relate all this entirely, and there were many lapses of time in which he said nothing but stared off into space and into galaxies. In these lapses, of course, I have omitted. Another day passed. So, since you will not, then shall I begin it? Heptha looked surprised at my persistence. We were at table in the kitchen after supper. I could wait no longer. It was a moment he did not expect. He did not answer, but only looked at me with unexcited expression, trying to hide his agitation out of courtesy. So I pressed further anyway. We can begin by examining those great alterings of which we are certain. The turning point in the history of the state, the assassination of the hegemox of the Republic, Florianus Rubelianus. It is admitted by all to be the point in history when the Regulian Principate would become even greater in its absolute sway over the Illystran continent. Of course, you are not blind to this.
I have changed my mind. I no longer wish to talk about it, or anything else of doings in the past, especially not the Principate. I don't want any more trouble. Your provocations the other day unbalanced my judgment. I must retract my offer concerning those matters. I have no certitude of their truth anyway.
Be assured that I will not speak openly about what you disclose, or anything forbidden. My word is irreproachable, Heptha. What you shall say will be set down in writing and preserved secretly for future generations in the nautilus shell of old Barham. You will be long dead before anyone bothers with it. Old Butterham is said to have had a great nautilus shell that somehow preserved many ancient texts. It has been proposed that this was not an actual shell, but merely the shape of a great library that he maintained. Nevertheless, if you choose to take with you this wisdom to the grave, surely there it must remain forever.
If I tell now what I must, then very soon my body will be found lifeless and cold, for there is an evil upon me. On the other hand, if I do not speak, no discerning generations in after time may have the wit to discover it unaided. So I shall therefore be consigned to hellfire. Therefore I am cross-jeopardized. To tell it will surely mean death to me, but to keep silent will be the second death, and woe to many.
Again, you are exaggerating, Heptha. How could any hostile enemy find out that you are the source? You said that you had been carrying this burden many years. The creature that howls at night is waiting for you because, like all predators, they seek wounded or weakened prey. Give me your research, and I shall set it down in ink, and the torment shall relinquish you. You will regain your strength. Do not fear enemy minds. You will be long gone, again traveling. And these writings I make, you and I shall hide them away in the dryness of the desert's cliffward caves, if it would comfort you.
Your desire for this is too great,
He said.
The demons can pick up patterns of speech from afar. I came here to tell you but one thing, and that must needs wait until I hear the trumpet. You see, in the dream that comes to me on certain nights, I hear a trumpet blast, a blast that also signals the final time, a blast which only I can hear, a blast made by angels. The sound of the horn always awakes me, reminds me of what is expected of the elect. Therefore I may reveal it only when the sun passes into the new week. For when that happens, the devil must leave off his hunt for a time.
But you said that you would grant my wish at half moon. Now you are blaming the demon again? Your imaginary pursuer?
It is not a demon. Rather does it adhere to a strict hierarchy of the infernal order. It is a Vecradian devil, according to the manual I examined. Had I not been so great a sinner, I might be able to banish the sinister thing by just lifting my hand, like other Ammouri. But as things stand, it is the divine will for me to be thus tormented for my offenses in this way. If the love of Christ does not drive me onwards, that thing will surely tear me in hopes to cause despair. It was the sorcerers of old who made it possible for these entities to clothe themselves with monstrous bodies. Let us speak no more, Aunt.
Speak no more. Please, do not humiliate me further. The man's head sunk down on the table, and he did not lift it again until several moments had passed.
Very well. I cannot keep you from what would be best for you not to know. I do this because you are an unbeliever, and therefore the prophecy shall have little effect upon you. You are vowed to speak it to no one, but only write it in the book. If you break your word, I cannot protect you, for I myself have forfeit protection. I will first offer you this. In the days before the Hegemax Florians was assassinated, that bloody event and so sad a thing, a bloodshed that so fascinates common men, some important things were being talked about. Things that could change all the civil lands.
What sort of things were being talked about?
Back then, hopeful things. Now, troubling to recall.
Such as?
Talk of two societies, of Regulian and Rumilian nobles. Very hopeful that their differences could be solved.
The lost histories describe how our Regulians migrated to the Illystrian continent, bringing with them Roman organization and engineering, and a hard-nosed philosophy. From across the sea they came and settled coastal Rumelia. The soil reminded them of their homeland. But a nation had already long been settled there, the Rumilians, descendants of Rumil, son of Maceon. With their love of nature and art, of poetry and song, it seemed an unlikely match. But the refined Rumilians did not begrudge the new administrators, the Regulians. Rather, they welcomed them, and cooperated to build a prosperous realm. However, the two peoples remained distinct, and intermarriage was discouraged in order that the royal family remain unique. Families that did intermarry were confined to the Vryn Hill, but in no way menaced. The Regulian hegemony eventually brought peace and order to many lands. The Rumilian king married the daughter of a dying Regulian king, and the Vrinth royal family was begun. It lasted many generations and died out, and the Republic was founded, and certain men were elected as hegemaks to replace the feudal kingship. Florians was the first Rumilian non-Vrinth unmixed ancestry to hold so powerful an office. As hegemaks, he nevertheless still had to accept the decisions of the Senate. It was not until Balgud that a true emperor wielded absolute power. Florians was elected as the 15th Hegemax and sat on the curule seat for 3.5 years. His virtue was unmistakable, but it did not sit well with certain senators, mostly Regulian aristocracy, men who profited from war. They began to murmur against the peaceful Rumilians, and even against Florians. Nevertheless, Florians continued to assert that peace could be maintained in all the civil lands through diplomacy.
But now few serious historians remain who would testify to any real hopeful peace through our own mortal effort. Most confess that such is but the dream of poets and artisans, indeed of Rumilians. Perhaps they were right. I say it is a thing beyond us mortals.
I have heard that there did arise a stronghold for peace in the Republic, and as you say, an end to civil fratricides and political calamities, perhaps even of freeing the slaves.
A hope, perhaps, he said. A bleak hope. The kind of hope a fisherman has after his nets remain empty for days on end. If it were genuine, true enough, I cannot say or judge, since even though I remember those days, I myself had no political knowledge at the time. I was but a slave, still a beardless youth. I was your slave, remaining untaught.
Yes, I said, looking down. But your servitude, Hefta, I pray, was not without mercy and humane treatment.
Not according to the proper perception of things.
Can you see that I, myself, am different? I was willing to take you in without requiring the sweat of the brow. No, but I have requested only one final act of servitude from you, to open the memories that your brow conceals.
You are not different. To propose that you are reveals a conceit. However, I am now become your accomplice in conceit for having pointed out your flaw. Nevertheless, I remain grateful for your sanctuary, so I am no better. You did not fare well, as you mentioned. Did you become a slave?
Only a scribe indentured. I had forgotten how to order a plantation according to sound principles of production.
You have not. I noticed that you arrange things on a similar pattern in your little desert garden. I wager that even your Neoplatonics will demand that you will burn for this.
At this comment, we laughed outrageously together, master and his ex-slave, if not equals in law or memory, then at least equals in strange humor. Then he continued.
But tell me, do you recall those years as well as I do?
Probably I do not, I said, for I was in the days of the world and its delights. Mature people, however, have sincere trust in the senatorial body and military enforcement. Most people thought that the moral codes of Ptoleus and Zerkades reflected a common foundation for all right conduct.
There are still some few who adhere with vigor to the truth,
He explained.
especially those who have encountered the opposition. But of those years, I do now recall something of interest. Things I did not understand at the time, but now they make passing sense. I recall how it was widely, perhaps foolishly thought that even those provinces and border kingdoms, the ones which had slipped into popular resistance against the Republic, could eventually be won over by diplomacy.
Yes, that was the common sentiment, I stated somberly.
Think about this.
He continued.
Those powerful politicians who despised peace were dead set against any diplomacy with the Ammouric kings. Florian's was promoting it, inviting them to become client kings. Then the assassination of Florian's succeeded, and did so through a conspiracy of senatorial levels. The planning involved cooperation of at least two factions. The Praetorian Guards, somehow linked with the Red Ascetic cult, and the other faction, senators hostile to the Hegemax's plan for removal of legions from the kingdom of Manaxar.
But if such secret factions existed, common opposition does not seem sufficient grounds for imputing conspiracy.
You of course cannot deny they did operate in common opposition. Do not play innocent with me. The Black Book is a record itself of an even vaster conspiracy, dating back many ages, of which the assassination was only a part.
And you hold that this is demonstrable?
No, it is not demonstrable. For if it were provable by historic investigation, it should be considered a failed conspiracy. But this murder has notoriously succeeded in its goal and anticipated after effects. Only a fool would believe or disbelieve otherwise.
Your logic is circular, Hepto.
That is merely my human ineptitude. As such, it has not much to do with this, being something larger than me or my logic. See me as a broken vessel unable to hold back the overflowing wine of truth. Consider it this way. We have heard much from other historians, skeptics, the same who have discounted the existence of conspiracy, and who are funded by certain senators, scoff at the accusation of conspiracy. Roaring waters of evidence are all around them, and yet they proclaim that there is no river, that the presence of waters is mere coincidence. Their grasp on reality is as tenuous as their blinding ideology. Now learn this. It has been long suspected that there must have somehow been courtiers secretly devoted to the Red Ascetic. It is whispered that the Red Ascetic at that time had secretly placed his hierarchy of priests and adepts not only within the Praetorian Guards to attend their cultic needs, but other important intelligence positions of the Principate as well, including the Imperial Cult and the academies.
So, what was his purpose?
Their infernal wisdom would have taught an erroneous doctrine, the hell philosophy of the Red Ascetic, and especially this ruthless principle, that any means whatsoever might be used to gain the advantage and power for the sake of integration. It seems that any means whatsoever were indeed used. This is a much worse thing than mere competition for political power. We are talking about ushering in an age of spiritual darkness. The Red Ascetic has even now replaced the Ammouric Patriarch in Veslum, the Holy City. It has become the seat of Antichrist. If you will not believe me, believe that devil.
Believe the devil?
You think it's hard to believe? Even the devils believe, and they tremble. So for now, I will explain all else that transpired. As you know, somebody slew the Imperial Hegemox, and the mysterious assassin was never found. One Vistan, a nobleman, however, was arrested. Do you recall?
Yes, he was held as suspect.
And within a day, he was set free without much questioning. Is that not so?
You have learned it correctly, I said. A great and influential landowner was next accused, and then the imperial lictors and tribunes themselves became suspect. In turn, they implicated certain senators, and evidence of a widespread conspiracy grew. What about it? A council of 12 tribunes was appointed to lead the official investigations. Did they learn anything of the puzzle? Not enough to interest anyone, I can't imagine.
It was enough to interest some,
He countered.
I do recall that to everyone's dismay, the investigative council concluded that no conspiracy against the Imperial Hegemox had existed.
I say, Hepta, these things are already well known. Enough of this running over old ground and feigning that you are divulging something new. Tell me the arcane knowledge that you have for too long withheld.
I do so at my own peril. Nevertheless, my life may not long continue now, and someone else must therefore receive these things, if that howling devil does not seize me first. However, be warned, the burden which this knowledge carries is great. Why else would so devastating a minion be sent against my blood, and seek my ruination? He will someday take me at last, take me to some horrible place in this world of darkness. But the Lord, I know, will rescue me, provided I am faithful even then.
Right. Therefore, do tell, and fear that no avenging spirit shall put out the lantern you have lit. Even when you are dead, after a long life, I shall use the flame to light other lanterns.
Listen close then. You recall how during those years after the assassination, the people understandably were weakened in their confidence of the public officials. Further problems and government scandals soon followed. Rumors of further conspiracies and plots abounded.
I was there. It was a troubled time.
Then do you recall the war and its demoralizing impact?
The Senate was being pressured to undertake a protracted war on behalf of a client king in the distant subtropical kingdom of Madaxar. An army of sun-worshipping centaurs had taken over that realm.
Is that all you know?
In the following weeks after the ambush, which changed my life and yours, 3 entire Regulian legions vanished in the savannas of Madagascar. As the anarchic situation dragged on, the people became cynical and irate, and occasional riots had to be put down.
Aye, but at the same time, new corruptions among the aristocracy were uncovered. Did you know that? It was not long before the institution of slavery would be reestablished. I was in danger of becoming a permanent slave. Fate would intervene.
In what way, Heffa, would fate intervene?
A day of reckoning was being prepared. Florian's successor, Emperor Balgod, had a juvenile temperament. He was power-hungry and ruthless, and later even corrupt. His poor appointments to the seats of judgment seemed to confirm this suspicion. Many saw that as a fateful trend for the Republic.
The people were badly behaved, Heffa. They deserved the leaders that they voted for. The Ammouri have a point in their teaching about divine justice. It were not fate, but rather chastisement.
If not fate, it was fatal in result. They lacked the wisdom of governance. Unsound laws were passed, contrary to traditions of the pious fathers. The most morally repugnant, for example, legalized the exposure of unwanted children to die in the wilderness of the Andolyn Mtns, an old Atlantean practice, contrary to nature, which even your ancestors consistently taught was heinous to the divine race.
But after Florian died and anarchy was ruining the state, it almost seemed that the Red Ascetic should become the high priest of the imperial cult, the Pontifex Maximus. I foolishly confirmed his appointment to the high priesthood. I was away in my country villa and had no idea of the unrest.
Then you should have considered more deeply the import of your office rather than the profit of your farm.
You are still sore at me for your servitude.
Not for my own difficulty and indignity, but I do bear an unhealing wound for my fellows. Please do not apologize. Now, I do not know if I can continue.
You are my guest. I require it of you. Don't you see? You have become as educated as I am.
However, be advised, I am become more educated than you, enough to realize that such learnedness means little. Nevertheless, I shall humor you. After you left, years passed, and the war in Madagascar dragged on. It became old news. The people of the Principate grew familiar to the yoke of the many corrupt officials. Even the wealthy began to enroll in the cult of the Red Ascetic. The Hegemox Balgod himself had entertained the Crimson Prince several times at the banquet.
The Red Ascetic, cult leader and guru. In reality, a sorcerer who joined his magic to spirituality and his spirituality to politics in a bizarre theology of sensual ecstasy, the so-called state of cathartic titan. He was a man of mediocre stature, bald, but with the eyes of a lustful woman, and he was one who had even attained to the spiritual leadership of all the continent, the patriarchal see of Vesselum, the holy city, and was even the Pontifex Maximus of all the Regulian realms, who seemed a lamb, but was not a lamb, and who spoke with the tongue of a dragon, a red dragon. He had plotted with 3 other sorcerers of Nystol by treachery for the overthrow of that famous Magian city and college, who had greatest sway and influence over the entire continents through magic for over 1,000 years. And it was her libraries, that great mistress of learning and knowledge, Nystol, that they wished to destroy, with all of the codices and scrolls there kept for thousands of years, to be burned down in a single day and night. the destruction of all wisdom and learning to be replaced by their own twisted religion.
The red ascetic was indeed a sorcerer. By his priestly allure and hypnotic gaze, the morality of first the court, and then later the people, little by little, corroded into pride, greed, and sensuality, and shameless behavior of lewdness.
All this part of the designs of the red ascetic.
Aye, uninterested in learning wisdom, the youth set their hearts on abandonment to pleasure and vice, beds of ivory, eventually taking up certain occult philosophies which supported their choice of evil living, allowed free reign of their lust. When a wise old senator warned them how the law was unsanctioning vice, he was silenced. Populus vult dicepi.
It is true. The indifferent masses do wish to be deceived, as it seems. I could never understand why.
So as not to be challenged, he explained. So as not to hazard an uncomfortable life as an expenditure for truth.
These ideas are interesting, and surely morality is something that law should guard for the maintaining of social control. But my friend, truth can be understood in many ways.
So you are an expert on truth.
I worship the gods and submit to the wisdom of seers, Hector.
What of the truth that is himself living truth?
He asked, pointedly. Have you really been persuaded by such cowering faith? I asked, hoping that he would realize his distortion.
I have.
It is vain superstition, devoid of reason, fit for slavish minds only. The sublime deity, pure spirit, does not incarnate as lowly human flesh.
The flesh, the body, is not lowly. We shall one day be changed, yes, stripped of this failing body, after long obedience of prayer and fasting, but in exchange for another body, a body by divine spirit made alive and imperishable glory. Ours is the faith of slaves, but now it is mastering even the earth entire.
It has not mastered the earth, nor can it. As you can see, all the firth is sinking into chaos, because the gods are neglected.
No, it is not sinking into chaos. What we have is darkness. Darkness always precedes the day. In right faith, no darkness can reside, and in time to come, darkness will seem as daylight, and the mind will not remember thoughts of woe. Even now we partake in the righteousness that surpasses the righteousness of the high Eldark in centuries past.
It is a teaching of devils.
I remind you that you do not believe in devils.
How you describe your faith is not what I have heard. Your prelates have stained their hands in blood. In the long years of the Ammouric hegemony, how many were executed for heresy? What sort of holy men would you esteem them?
Our doctrine does not render men holy. It only affords them to make holy men of themselves, a thing which your wisdom laws cannot do, no matter how much effort you make to fulfill them. But it is difficult for an earthbound mind to learn such ways of sublime truth.
How can anyone? Certainly not with such arbitrary and contrived doctrines as your priests propose. If you wish to reform your faith and make it acceptable to reasonable men, why don't you change such absurdities of belief?
What has been revealed on high we men have no power to alter. It is true that we are unreasonable, even fools, just as a lover becomes a fool for the sake of his beloved. Our wisdom is not of this world. Therefore we put off all vainglory and boastful extravagance, all vices and wicked living, wise speculations, and the worship of idols. You see how much you struggle to learn the rudiments of spirituality with your philosophic axioms of meditation, all these diagrams of the heavens you make, struggling to get hold of some little secret which is neither here nor there. Our Heavenly Father has given us insights beyond imagining, real nourishment of the next world.
No wonder a devil pursues you. You have no experience of such things as I attain to. Enough. Let us continue with the history of the conspiracy.
I do have an experience to know that you are not yet ready to receive the dreadful history which I am burdened with.
What experience, Hector?
You would not believe it, nor will I cast my prose before the swine.
I will respect your word. Tell it.
Let us return to the history of the conspiracy.
We must. But first tell me of your experience, for it seems to bear upon these things.
Very well. I warn you to keep it close, for when the angel finds out, he shall cast fiery glances about us. Not long after I escaped the prison of Gohha, I set my face to the work of living in accord with the Spirit. One day in the empty wilderness, a grand vision was given to me. My awareness was resting in the Spirit, and of a sudden certain powerful holy ones appeared before me, wearing garments whiter than snow, and whose visage shone brighter than the sun, and crying out, I fell down to worship them. But they said, only the one who sits upon the throne receives worship. They brought me to a high mountain, and took away the covering of flesh that veiled my sight. Looking down again, I perceived this entire world as it is seen according to the Spirit. It had become so ensnared in darkness as to be covered over by a massive web of some demonic archon who seemed much like a spider sucking the life from the many souls it ensnares. Lesser demons accomplished its every bidding, but there were many holy angels as well, who were guiding souls away from death and hell, from the pleasures of the flesh that chain us to this darkened realm. I asked, will the earth ever be free of the evil power? The angel looked at me and answered,
This earth is passing away, but it is for you to announce that souls may be freed from the illusion of the flesh, for many are deluded. If you will accept this call, you will be pleasing to the unspeakable one who sits upon the throne. Know that he has chosen you for it.
Then I replied, but I am a condemned thief, and a man of envious eyes and bloody hands. He replied,
That is true, you must pay for your crimes, and there will be sent a devil who will not cease to vex you. In the end he will drive you to ruin, but provided you persevere, you shall not perish forever in darkness. As for your eyes and hands, they shall be made clean.
Suddenly there came a blinding light into my eyes, and bright interior burning of great pain. Time did not pass as we are accustomed. Then I was shown a shimmering stream that welled up from a spring in the mountain, and I drank from its gurgling waters, and at once I was taken up, far into the seventh heaven. There I saw and heard things that no man may utter. That is the vision. The purpose of my life. I come as a messenger.
That is a tale of high imagining, I concluded, smiling.
It is no tale, it is my experience. You think it a delusion?
Only if you still fear death.
Fear death? One should not fear it. That is true. But the flesh cannot be disrobed until the time has come. It is written, mere flesh cannot inherit the kingdom of the Father. My spirit must endure persecutions for now. Perhaps I fear not of death, but rather fear the pain that being born into the next world requires. More likely it is this. I dread that in my hour of trial, the evil spirit might achieve an advantage against me. Who is he who is ready to meet the majesty divine and face the inscrutable judgment? I have been a sinful man, sinning out of weakness, even since my great vision. The worldly glories still attract me, and I cannot put to death my carnal nature for very long. I confess, I have also met travelers, and have stolen many jewels and coin from them whilst they slept, even striking one of them down after he awoke. Oh, what a remorse for a wicked deed done! It is sheer perplexity, like a Judas. I hear that winged devil laugh and prepare new tortures. Most of all, however, the entity wants to destroy me for the knowledge I possess. Retribution, it waits not far off, listening, trailing me wherever I go, howling, waiting for me to slip up and tell everything.
What measures, therefore, shall we provide against your imaginary foe?
Let us beware, you and I, not any further to contend for one over another in easy quips when we offer rebuttals. For the Satan always wins, persuading by whispered intrusion, wherever weakened charity has left a sounding hole in righteous conversation. I know I have no more to say now.
But you must explain many things, as promised.
I did not promise, but now I am weary and do not judge it safe, and I may easily slip in speech.
Very well. Tomorrow we shall go in the morning to the hills to gather berries and find water. You can tell me what you know there. It will be safer. No one is around there. Indeed, that is what we did on the morrow. For I awoke the man Heptha early in the morning, and we tied the baskets and went off. His hands were to be a great help for me during this harvest month. During the hike up into the great hill, which I bade be made in silence, I cannot help but have a private chuckle for myself over his stories about the aerial spirits and his one crucified deity. At one point during the hike, while occupying myself with trivial thoughts to alleviate the strenuous climbing work, I imagined a ludicrously shaped black devil grabbing him in the same way a monkey grabs a human head. I broke into a fit of uncontrollable laughter. I even collapsed to the ground and threw my head back. I rolled upon my back, weirdly overcome with the hilarity of the thought.
What is wrong? Why do you laugh so great a laugh? What has made you so mad?
After some moments, having mustered as much self-control as I could, I merely claimed to have incidentally thought of some parable involving a monkey chasing a woodland creature.
Which parable?
He asked. It is of no account, Heptha. Let us go.
Such laughter is a sign of the evil one.
He remarked sternly as I turned away. His remark was ignored. After reaching the summit and working for several hours upon the crags picking berries, I bade him sit and drink desert flower milk and partake of the cheeses. Thanks to my great prudence, I had brought along my notebook and pen. So we began again. You had remarked that we should not exchange quips and sayings merely to counter one another. We must be humble to arrive at the truth.
Aye, and we must remember, even in those days of the waning of the Republic, both your Eldark forms and our Ammouric ways were often scoffed at, and even considered impious and perverse. Noble and upright men, both Regulian and Rumilian, after some time removed from the city and went to dwell in country villas or join monastic groups in the desert.
Yes, well, that was certainly what I hoped to do at the time. Think of it, the memory of the youthful and confident Florians, so brutally slain, has an impact that is still known. Even now, many, by gleaning inquiry, try to discern the facts of the tragedy. Those who make any progress soon find themselves in a labyrinth of contradictions too deep for them to contemplate. Certain senators and magistrates may have been involved in destroying evidence. No historian, save perhaps the imperial analyst, doubts that a conspiracy was at work, designed by the highest elements of society and somehow involving the red aesthetic.
I have found that it is truly the case,
said Heptha. There are many things rumored to be written in the Black Book, the work which some have taken every hazard to possess, and which you say you used to keep hidden in a wild place and consult only very late at night. Those writings, even though the greater portion of them seem fairy tale, the stuff of your Ammouric superstition, I do confess, when understood in the proper context, having consulted an allegoric key, and so having been purged of their unreason, truly do they convince at what seems to be a conspiracy of shadows. They suggest something more profound and long evolving, even than the assassination of Florians. Now so many years past. Perhaps I can add what you have learned to the marginalia, if you would tell it to me. After all, you saw everything.
Very well.
Heptha said wearily.
Consider the life of Vistan and the actions of Epinanias. For a long time, Epinanias himself was thought to be involved in the conspiracy, and he died at the hands of Vistan shortly after the assassination.
I thought it strange that Heptha used the name Epinanias. He used my own name, and even seemed to be referring to me, looking at me, as if I was the Epinanias that he was speaking of, for I also am a historian.
Think on this. You must recall that at the time of Epinanias' death, in the months just after the assassination, 3 years before the great burning of Nystol, there had been a violent upheaval in the politics of the Allapis coast, not far from Regulum. You recall, of course, this unrest?
Heptha went on to explain this unrest. Two principal clans of the city were in competition for control of the state. The Reguli, descendants of the ancient Roman kings, and the Rumili, the Maceonid tribe which tradition holds had lived out there from the beginning. The Regulian hegemony was not yet fully consolidated. The ancient Rumilian nobility, said to be derived from the Maceonids of the early Firth, still traced their own theocratic patriarchies and were keeping in check most of the Regulian reforms. Much of the old wealth was in the hands of the families that dwelt on the Vrinth Hill, where the old royalty still lived. It was wealth passed down from the Atlantean line of overlord, a dynasty long defunct, but sharing with the sons of Rumil. The senatorial government of the territories was now chosen by rival guilds, some of whom shipped huge quantities of Ardevi grain on barges down the Washir River, the river which separates the city in 3 parts to the sea. The Regulian guilds were mostly barges sent down the Washir River loaded with grain. One spring, these Regulian ship guilds claimed that their rivals, the Rumilian sea haulers, had in a night raid burnt their trading barges. The barges had been docked throughout the Washir Delta, the very boundary of influence. The Reguli clans quickly retaliated. The resultant violence was far too exaggerated to have been spontaneous. It cramped the composure of the noble families, who were in fear for their lives. On this account, the Senate declared martial law and imposed it for several moons. Mercenary protection from abroad had to be hired. It was a situation which drained many noble families of their wealth.
Most historians do point to the dissatisfaction among the guilds and other workers as the cause of political factionalism, Epinanias. I think that you would know better, though.
So it is really true that after the assassination, criminal elements, corrupt governors, senators, and praetorians had a free-for-all.
What you say is true, and they had succeeded in the entrapment of Epinanias' most ancient father, Kephelaus, and had designs to seize Epinanias' ancestral Ipatrid plantation. And Epinanias' father, bless his noble head, went on trial under the trumped-up charge of having spread seditious talk among the commoners in order to inspire mutiny against both rival guilds. In truth, he only opposed overtaxation promoted by the guilds and the horsemasters. As for Epinanios, he himself had many old enemies from the ancient wars. These clans had, in long absence, taken control of the magisterial positions by subversive alliances with the Regulians loyal to the Red Ascetic. Then Epinanios himself, venerable historian, a Romilian, was implicated for assisting the reactionary politicals known as the Mad and Scared Dogs. Even though Epinanios was thought to be an inactive member of the party, he was charged with other less serious crimes. These in total normally carried only the punishment of cheek slappings. But your gods did not smile upon him in those dark times. He appeared before the Senatorial Committee of Royal and Noble Inquiry, the old Romulian jurisprudence that had been allowed to keep its title. He was sentenced very strictly after the incitements of Vistan, a watcher of the courts and an influential member of the Echecratid family of the old Regulian line, a man still under scrutiny for his suspect role in Florian's assassination. And we know that he was a member of the Mad and Scared Dogs. Already a court had indicted, tried, and secured the execution of many so-called mutineers, rebels, and heretics of the Hill Cult. The Mad and Scared Dogs was a subversive organization.
These men were, in reality, merely political dissenters, right, Heptha? Men who had refused to accept bribery as a means of political discourse. They certainly were not rebels. They certainly were not really active members of the Mad and Scared Dogs.
They were indeed to become pawns in a deadly game. Epinanios was a piece occupying a key position. At a critical moment during his father's trial, which all records reveal was rigged and illegal, this Vistan character, a long-standing critic and adversary, had taken out a very long pipe and begun to stoke it, billowing smoke profusely.
A thing well known to be rude, I observed. And that should never be done in the presence of a Vrinth noble, or any noble for that matter.
Never, no, never. It is so rude, in fact, that there have been several noble deaths on account of duels thusly provoked in the past. So right there, Epinanios angrily rebuked him, publicly shaming Vistan as half-spawn and a brute, and tearing at him with cutting words.
Stultior, Asino, huh? Huh? Stultior!
Vistan drew his horse sword, for nobles could not lawfully be disarmed unless in the presence of the hegemox, and running forth he impaled the incredulous and terrified Epinanios. The long sword tearing through the man's tunica, slicing the guts, and another strike piercing the throat, the thorax, and arteries.
Was everyone certain that this was Epinanios and not some hired double? It would have been wise for Epinanios to have cheaply hired a double, having been gone so long. No one would recognize a difference.
There is no doubt that it was Epinanios who died there.
How exactly went his last moments?
Torrents of blood rushed out of the man, but his knees gave way. He began spitting up blood. It was pitiful.
This should be counted for sacrilege, as well as murder, should it not? After all, the Senate is held as a sacred body, and the chambers of the Senate have been consecrated to the divine beings.
Yes, even the Ammouric law must consider this a crime of the highest order.
It is truly appalling to hear these things, and to learn that a man of such reputation as Vistan, of Vrinth noble, could have been provoked to such an unreasonable and bloody wrath and madness, or that one of the senators would publicly dishonor a man of the old royal lineage like him.
Great men are sometimes found capable of great evils. Unfortunately for Vistan, there would be no trial. A guard appointed by the High Court was on duty nearby. He was readily armed and immediately acted to dispatch the man to Tartarus with a swift flying arrow shot. famous author Epimenides, however, remained alive, though fading quickly. He did not die immediately. The blood vessels in the neck were torn, but his esophagus remained intact, allowing him speech. Covered with blood, Epimenides begged that his scribe, his most trusted servant Heptha, myself, be brought to him. I was rushed in from the senatorial antechamber immediately. As he lay during many moments it took for him to give up the ghost, he granted the remainder of his wealth to the execrated family of Vistan as reparation, an act later criticized by some as suspect. Then he called upon one Ambrosius, the Ammourid.
Ambrosi, amor. Resari factis quactium, concedant ideas. Sodom occasione, civis, sensiones tu excitarritasi. De aquae, porra, cassionant sit. Ambrosia.